What 9-year-old Emma whispered to Steve Harvey that day changed everything about live television forever. But it wasn't just her devastating words that made America's most confident and experienced host completely forget he was being watched by millions. It was the way she looked at him with those impossibly wise eyes, the heartbreaking secret she'd been carrying alone for months, and the sacred promise she made him swear to keep that would haunt and inspire him for the rest of his life. The moment she leaned close and spoke those soul-crushing words directly into his ear, Steve Harvey stopped being a television host and became something else entirely. A man watching a remarkable child teach the world what true courage looks like in the face of unimaginable loss. Standing under the blazing, almost blinding lights of the Family Feud studio that fateful Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta, Steve Harvey thought he was completely prepared for anything life could throw at him. After hosting over 5,000 episodes across his legendary television career spanning more than 2 decades, he'd encountered and masterfully handled every conceivable scenario that could possibly unfold on a game show set. He'd witnessed contestants fainting from overwhelming excitement, families breaking into genuine heated arguments that required security intervention, technical difficulties that lasted for hours and tested everyone's patience, wardrobe malfunctions that sent producers into absolute panic mode, and even the occasional medical emergency that brought paramedics rushing onto the set. His lightning-quick wit and natural charismatic charm had carried him through countless awkward moments, uncomfortable silences that stretched for what felt like eternity, and situations that would have completely destroyed lesser hosts and ended careers. Steve had built his reputation on his remarkable ability to think on his feet, to find humor in any situation, and to connect with people from all walks of life in ways that felt genuine and authentic. But absolutely nothing in his 3 decades of intensive television experience, nothing in his years of stand-up comedy, dealing with hecklers and hostile crowds, nothing in his extensive life experience had prepared him for what Emma Rodriguez was about to whisper in his ear. Emma stood barely 4 feet tall at the family podium, her tiny, delicate frame almost completely swallowed by the bright, overwhelming studio lights that blazed down from every angle. She wore a sunshine yellow dress that her beloved grandmother had spent countless weeks carefully selecting, altering, and perfecting specifically for their once-in-a-lifetime television appearance. The dress had been chosen not just for its cheerful color, but because Emma's grandmother believed that yellow represented hope, joy, and the bright future she desperately wanted to believe her granddaughter would have. Her silky dark hair was pulled back in 2 neat pigtails tied with matching yellow ribbons that coordinated perfectly with her dress, and despite the obvious nervousness radiating from her small body language, there was something remarkably composed and mature about her presence that immediately caught Steve's experienced and perceptive attention. Her deep brown eyes held a profound depth and understanding that seemed far beyond her tender 9 years, as if she'd already witnessed and comprehended things that most adults spend entire lifetimes trying to understand or accept. But there was something else in those eyes, something that made Steve pause and look more carefully. It was a sadness that seemed too heavy for such a young soul, mixed with a determination that suggested she was carrying knowledge that no child should ever have to bear. Those eyes told a story of hospital visits, whispered conversations she wasn't supposed to hear, and a maturity forced upon her by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The Rodriguez family from Phoenix, Arizona, had endured 6 grueling, emotionally exhausting months of intensive auditions, multiple callback interviews, extensive background checks, and psychological evaluations before finally being selected for their dream appearance on America's most beloved and longest-running game show. This wasn't just a random selection. This was the culmination of a process that had tested their family dynamics, their ability to work under pressure, and their entertainment value for television audiences. They were competing that day against the Williams family from Detroit, Michigan, in what should have been a joyful, stress-free celebration of family unity, competitive spirit, and the possibility of winning life-changing money that could transform their financial situation forever. The studio atmosphere was absolutely electric with anticipation, filled with the infectious laughter, enthusiastic applause, and competitive energy that had made Family Feud a beloved cultural institution for over 4 decades across multiple generations of American families. Steve was completely and utterly in his element that afternoon, masterfully working the crowd with his signature blend of self-deprecating humor, genuine warmth, and that indefinable charisma that had made him one of America's most beloved television personalities. He moved between the two families with practiced ease and natural grace, creating those magical, spontaneous moments of authentic human connection that his millions of devoted fans across the country had come to love, expect, and anticipate with each episode. The energy was building perfectly, both families were performing exceptionally well, and everything seemed to be flowing exactly as it should for what promised to be another memorable episode. But during the crucial third round of competition, something shifted dramatically in ways that absolutely nobody in that packed studio could have anticipated or prepared for. The survey question had seemed completely innocent and straightforward enough, the type of positive, family-friendly question that typically generated enthusiastic responses and plenty of opportunities for Steve's trademark comedic commentary and crowd interaction. Name something that makes someone feel brave, Steve had announced with his usual confident enthusiasm, his voice carrying clearly across the studio to every corner where audience members sat in eager anticipation. Emma's 18-year-old sister Maria, a high school senior who had been nervously clutching her buzzer with sweaty palms for the entire game, had just delivered the coveted #1 answer with surprising confidence and a bright, relieved smile. Having family support, the response had earned them crucial points and sent the entire Rodriguez family into absolutely jubilant celebration as they secured their chance to control the board and potentially win the round, bringing them one step closer to the grand prize that could change their lives forever. That's precisely when Steve noticed something that made his well-honed comedian instincts and decades of audience reading experience go completely and utterly silent. While her entire family was enthusiastically cheering, jumping up and down, high-fiving each other, and celebrating their success around her, 9-year-old Emma had silent tears streaming steadily down her small, increasingly pale face. But these weren't tears of overwhelming joy, excitement, or the kind of happy overwhelm that you might naturally expect from a young child experiencing the incredible thrill of being on national television for the first time in her life. These tears were something entirely different, something much deeper and infinitely more profound than anything that belonged in a game show setting. These were tears that spoke of devastating loss that hadn't happened yet, but felt inevitable, of unimaginable fear that kept her awake at night, and of an impossible burden far too heavy for such small, fragile shoulders to bear alone. These were the tears of someone who had heard conversations they weren't supposed to hear, who understood medical terms that no child should know, and who was carrying knowledge that was slowly crushing her spirit.
Have you ever encountered someone carrying a secret so absolutely devastating and life-altering that it physically weighs them down, changing their posture, their breathing, their entire presence in a room? That's exactly what Steve saw when he looked more closely and intently at Emma's trembling, diminutive figure. Her delicate frame seemed to be somehow containing and holding something enormous, dark, and terrifying, something that no innocent child should ever have to face alone, especially not while trying to participate in what should have been a joyful family experience. Steve's immediate and instinctive reaction was to offer comfort and reassurance, naturally assuming these were simply overwhelming emotions resulting from the intense, high-pressure experience of being on national television in front of millions of viewers, cameras, and bright lights. This was a reaction he'd perfected over years of dealing with nervous contestants, overwhelmed families, and children who sometimes became scared or confused by the studio environment. He approached her with that characteristically warm, reassuring smile that had endeared him to countless millions of fans over the years, ready to gently comfort and reassure what he believed was just another nervous, overwhelmed child who needed a moment of encouragement, support, and adult guidance to get through a difficult moment.
Steve had perfected this approach over years of working with families, and he knew exactly how to put nervous children at ease with just the right combination of humor, warmth, and genuine care. But when Emma slowly lifted her head and looked up at Steve with those wide, expressive, impossibly sad eyes, he saw something that stopped him completely cold in his tracks and made every instinct he'd developed over decades of television experience suddenly feel inadequate. It wasn't the typical nervousness, stage fright, or excitement he was accustomed to seeing in young contestants who were experiencing the overwhelming nature of television production for the first time. It wasn't performance anxiety, fear of saying the wrong thing, or worry about disappointing her family in front of a national audience. It was profound, soul-deep, adult-level pain mixed with a wisdom, understanding, and acceptance that belonged to someone decades older than her tender 9 years. This was the look of someone who had stared mortality in the face and somehow found the strength to keep smiling, keep hoping, and keep protecting the people she loved most in the world. "Steve," Emma whispered in a voice so quiet, fragile, and desperate that it was barely audible over the studio's continued enthusiastic energy, celebration, and audience applause. "Can I please tell you something really, really important? But not here, not with everyone listening and watching. I need to tell you something private, something that nobody else can hear right now." The studio was still actively buzzing with excitement, celebration, and energy from Maria's correct answer, with audience members continuing to applaud and cheer, family members hugging and congratulating each other, and the general atmosphere of a successful game show moment in full swing. Everyone was completely unaware of the deeply personal, life-altering moment that was quietly unfolding between the beloved host and this remarkably brave child standing before him. Steve instinctively glanced toward the production booth, where directors, producers, and technical staff were monitoring every aspect of the show, tracking timing, commercial breaks, and the overall flow of the episode, then slowly looked back at Emma's upturned, pleading face. Every single television instinct he had developed and refined over his long, successful career told him to maintain the show's established momentum and energy, to handle this sensitive situation during the upcoming commercial break, to keep the entertainment flowing smoothly for the millions of viewers who were counting on him to deliver the experience they expected. Instead, he made a decision that would define not just that episode, but his entire understanding of what television could be at its most powerful. Steve Harvey dropped his index cards and called out to stop everything. The music cut out, the audience fell silent, and even the camera operators sensed something extraordinary was happening. Without hesitation, Steve gently lifted Emma from her position and carried her to the center of the stage. He knelt down to her eye level, creating an intimate space in the middle of that vast studio. Behind the scenes, producers gestured frantically, but Steve had already made his choice. This moment was bigger than television. "What do you need to tell me, sweetheart?" Steve asked softly, his voice stripped of all performance. Emma looked around at the silent studio, at her family watching with growing concern, at the cameras that were still rolling, despite the unprecedented break in protocol. Then she leaned close to Steve's ear, so close that her breath tickled his skin, and whispered words that would change everything. "I'm dying, Steve, and I need you to promise me something." The words hit him like a physical blow, but Emma wasn't finished. Her small voice continued, speaking directly into his ear with an urgency that only he could hear. "I have leukemia, and the doctors say I probably won't see my 10th birthday. My family thinks I don't know, but I heard them talking to the doctors. I've been pretending everything is normal because I wanted them to have this moment, this happiness, without thinking about losing me." Steve's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't just a sick child seeking comfort. This was a 9-year-old girl who had been carrying an impossible secret, protecting her family from additional pain while facing her own mortality with extraordinary courage. But Emma still wasn't finished whispering her devastating truth. "I need you to promise me that you'll help them remember the good times after I'm gone. Promise me you'll remind them that I wasn't scared at the end, that I was happy we got to be here together. Promise me you'll tell them that love is stronger than being sad." The cameras captured Steve's face as Emma's words sank in, though the microphones couldn't pick up her whispered confession. Viewers would later describe watching a man transform before their eyes, seeing the exact moment when a television host became something deeper and more human. Steve forgot completely that he was on television. He forgot about ratings, entertainment value, and commercial breaks. He forgot about the hundreds of people watching in the studio and the millions more who would eventually see this moment. All that existed was this remarkable child who was teaching him about courage in ways he'd never imagined possible. "I promise," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise all of that and more." What happened next has become legendary in television history, though the full story has never been told until now. Steve wrapped his arms around Emma in a hug that lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When they finally separated, he did something unprecedented in game show history. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, and wrapped it around Emma's tiny shoulders. "This is so you'll always remember that you're the bravest person I've ever met," he told her, his voice carrying across the completely silent studio. Then Steve stood and addressed the entire studio with a gravity that transcended entertainment. "Ladies and gentlemen, this little girl has just taught us something more important than any game. She's shown us what real courage looks like." He turned to the Williams family, their competitors. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest. Would you mind if we changed the rules today? This isn't about winning anymore." The Williams family patriarch stood immediately. "Steve, you do whatever that little girl needs." What followed was pure magic. Both families joined together, playing as one team for Emma. Steve abandoned traditional rules entirely, creating questions designed specifically to make her laugh and smile. When she giggled at his silly impressions, the entire studio erupted in applause that had nothing to do with game show excitement and everything to do with celebrating a remarkable child's spirit. Emma answered 3 questions that night, none of which were on the survey board, but all of which were perfect. When Steve asked, "Name something that makes you brave," she answered, "Loving people even when it hurts." When he asked, "Name something that lasts forever," she said, "The way you make people feel." And when he asked, "Name something worth fighting for," she looked at her family and said, "Making sure they know they made me happy." The episode that aired 3 months later became the highest rated in Family Feud history. More importantly, it raised over $3 million for children's cancer research. Emma's story reached people around the world, inspiring countless acts of kindness and courage. Emma Rodriguez fought her leukemia with treatments funded partly by donations from viewers moved by her story. Against all odds, she celebrated her 10th birthday, then her 11th, then her 12th. Steve kept his promise, staying in touch with the family, providing support for her treatment, and ensuring they knew their daughter had touched millions of lives. On each birthday, Emma received a new jacket from Steve, perfectly tailored to fit her growing frame. The notes inside always read, "From one brave soul to another, keep teaching us what courage looks like, Uncle Steve." Today, Emma is 16 years old and cancer-free. She still has Steve's original jacket, now framed in her bedroom. Every year, on the anniversary of that episode, Steve receives the same message: still here, still fighting, still remembering your promise. The lesson Emma taught that day went far beyond television. She showed millions of people that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing love and hope in the face of unimaginable challenges. She demonstrated that even in our darkest moments, we can choose to protect others, to create joy, and to leave the world better than we found it. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed him forever. He discovered that sometimes the most important moments happen when you forget about being perfect, forget about following rules, and simply choose to be human. Sometimes a 9-year-old girl in a yellow dress can teach a room full of adults what really matters in life. That whispered conversation between a dying child and a game show host became a reminder that love transcends entertainment, that truth is more powerful than performance, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is simply be present for someone who needs you. The cameras captured everything that day, but what they couldn't capture was the transformation that happened in every person who witnessed Emma's extraordinary courage. They couldn't record the way her whispered words changed, not just Steve Harvey, but everyone who heard her story. Because sometimes it takes a child to remind us what it means to be truly alive, truly brave, and truly human. And sometimes those lessons come in whispers that echo long after the cameras stop rolling.